They were hidden beneath the floorboards, left to vanish in silence. Two newborn souls, wrapped in damp cloth, abandoned as if they never mattered. No warmth, no safety, only darkness and the echo of their own cries. Until one man and his loyal German shepherd uncovered the secret no one dared to face. A police officer trained to protect, now standing against a danger no badge had prepared him for. Two fragile lives hung in the balance. What happened next will break your heart and restore your faith in humanity. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments so we can see how far this story travels. And if you believe in miracles, if you believe every child deserves a chance at life, hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to hear will stay with you forever. The wind had a way of carrying whispers through the Gallatin Valley, especially in early winter when the mountains around Bozeman, Montana were heavy with snow. The courthouse in the center of town looked older than the city itself, its white columns stained gray, windows fogged from the breath of too many anxious men inside. Outside, the air was brittle, and the dirt road that cut past the courthouse was a ribbon of frozen mud. Snow drifted in thin veils across the ground, making every step crunch under boot leather. The auction drew a small crowd, though no one seemed eager. They were ranchers, carpenters, merchants' faces lined from years of high sun and harder winters. Yet their eyes weren't on the auctioneer's block. They were on the man standing quietly near the back, his coat buttoned to the neck, his posture straight, though he carried weariness in his shoulders. Caleb Hayes, 38, was not the kind of man people expected to see at a land auction. A police officer by profession, he had served more than a decade in Bozeman's department. Tall, broad-shouldered, with sandy blonde hair cropped close and a jaw marked by the hint of salt and pepper stubble. Caleb had the look of a man carved by long days and long nights. His eyes, steel gray, the kind that saw too much, moved carefully from person to person. There was kindness in him, but it was the wary kind, born of loss. Caleb's partner stood by his side, tail brushing against his boots. Max, a German shepherd, 10 years old, black and tan coat dusted by flakes of snow. His left ear drooped slightly, scar tissue tightening along his right flank, a faint reminder of a knife wound he had once taken on duty. To strangers, Max looked like a weathered dog past his prime. To Caleb, he was the closest thing to family. The dog had earned his name long ago. In Caleb's second year as an officer, he'd been called to a domestic dispute where fire had broken out in a small trailer. Caleb had run inside, smoke blinding his eyes, to find a child pinned under a fallen beam. He pulled the boy out, but collapsed himself just shy of the door. That was when Max, barely trained, still new to the K-9 unit, dragged Caleb free, searing his paws in the fire. The boy survived. His name was Maxwell. Caleb had named the dog after him, not out of sentimentality, but as a living reminder of why he served, to pull someone else out of the fire when they couldn't pull themselves. The auctioneer tapped his gavel against the block, the sound hollow. Lot 12. The Willow Creek property. His voice lacked enthusiasm, as though he were calling the name of a ghost. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Everyone knew Willow Creek, 12 acres of land, a rotting cabin, an old well, and a corral leaning like broken ribs. For years it had been left untouched. Some said cursed, some said haunted, others whispered of things best not unearthed. Caleb raised his hand, calm and deliberate. 50 cents, he said, a joke almost. But when the auctioneer frowned, he corrected himself. $50. No one countered. The silence was thick. The gavel hovered. In that silence, Caleb felt the weight of dozens of stares. Not envy, not annoyance, pity. From the edge of the crowd, an elderly woman pressed forward. She was Eudora Pike, the town librarian, a woman known for her rigid spine and her sharp tongue softened only by the years. Her silver hair was tied back in a neat bun, and her spectacles clung to the edge of her nose. She had spent her life among books, guarding their secrets, and her manner had hardened like the leather spines she loved. Yet her eyes were not unkind. They were worried. "You don't want that place, son," she whispered, clutching her shawl. "Trust me. Don't stay there after dark." Before Caleb could reply, the auctioneer dropped the gavel with a crack. "Sold, to the gentleman in the brown coat, $50. The crowd dispersed quickly, almost too quickly, boots scattering on frozen earth like a startled flock of birds. Caleb signed the deed, the paper cold in his hand. The auctioneer avoided his eyes, and when Caleb asked about the land's history, the man muttered, "Nothing worth telling," and walked away. As Caleb and Max made their way back to the wagon, Caleb noticed something else. Beyond the last row of hitching posts, a black pickup truck with no license plate sat idling. Its engine rumbled low, the driver's shape barely visible behind tinted glass. Snow collected on the hood, but the truck did not leave. It just waited, watching. The road out to Willow Creek was rough, lined with bare cottonwoods rattling in the wind. The cabin itself sat squat against the hills, the stone chimney cracked, windows blackened with grime. The roof sagged, shingles peeled like scabs, but the bones of the place were still strong. Max bounded forward, sniffing at the frozen corral posts before stopping at the old pump house. His body stiffened, hackles rising. He let out a low growl, the sound like a warning torn from deep in his chest. Caleb followed, running his hand along the doorframe. The wood had been welded shut with fresh tar and heavy nails, as if someone wanted to keep the pump house sealed at all costs. The acrid scent of asphalt lingered. The sun slid lower, smearing the horizon with bruised purple. Caleb stood with the deed in one hand, Max at his side, and felt the weight of a decision he couldn't yet name. Willow Creek was his now for better or worse. But the way Max's growl echoed through the stillness made it clear. The land was holding something it did not want to give up. The first night in Willow Creek did not pass in silence. The old timbers groaned as if the land itself resented having an owner again. Caleb had settled in the front room with a lantern flickering low, writing notes about repairs the place needed, while Max prowled restlessly. The German shepherd's paws clicked against the warped planks as he circled the house, nose twitching, amber eyes catching the lantern light with a nervous gleam. When Max froze at the doorway to the storage shed attached to the cabin, Caleb knew something was wrong. The dog's body stiffened, shoulders squared, hackles rising in a ridge down his spine. Max pressed his nose against the floor and gave a deep, guttural growl before pawing furiously at the boards. Caleb crouched, pushing the lantern closer, and found the planks smeared with a black tarry substance, the edges sealed tight with crooked nails bent in hasty angles. The smell of pitch stung his nose. Someone had deliberately locked away whatever lay beneath. He fetched a pry bar from the corner, wedged it under the seam, and forced it upward. With a groan of splitting wood, the panel lifted, revealing a dark square beneath. A waft of damp air rose up, sour and stale. Caleb leaned in and froze as a faint, broken sound climbed from the darkness. A cry. Small. Weak. Not one, but two. His heart pounded as he reached down and hauled up a wooden crate. Its sides scratched as though something inside had struggled. The lid was bound with rope, the knots clumsy but tight. Caleb's hands shook as he cut them loose. The lid fell back and the lantern revealed two newborns wrapped in damp wool, their skin pale, lips tinged blue from cold. Their cries were thin, gasping. Beside them lay a bottle of formula, almost empty, the nipple gnawed from frantic feeding. Caleb inhaled sharply. They had been here only days, too, perhaps 3 at most, but long enough that hunger and cold had taken their toll. He pulled off his coat and wrapped them both, tucking their fragile bodies against his chest. Max whined low, then climbed closer, pressing his warm flank against the infant's, licking one tiny fist as if to coax it back to life. Caleb's training kicked in. He set the lantern aside, grabbed his radio, and called for emergency medical. 2 neonates, found abandoned, he said through gritted teeth, forcing calm into his voice. Alive, but hypothermic. Send a rig to Willow Creek immediately, minutes stretched. The baby's cries ebbed and surged, weak but defiant. Max lay beside them, his breath hot against their damp blankets, keeping them warm with every inch of his body. Caleb pressed 2 fingers gently against each tiny neck. There were pulses, faint but there. He whispered, "Hold on. Just hold on." From outside, a sound caught him, the low sweep of headlights sliding across the cabin wall. Caleb stiffened. Through the shutter's crack, he glimpsed a pair of beams cutting the hillside, pausing, then moving like eyes prowling in the dark. A vehicle perched at the ridge, engine low, unseen but watching. The beams lingered before finally drifting away, swallowed by the night. Caleb's gut tightened. Someone knew these children had been left here. Someone wanted to see if they'd stay hidden. The wail of a siren broke the tension. A county ambulance rumbled down the dirt road, snow crunching under its tires. The headlights washed the cabin in white. Caleb hurried outside with the crate, Max pacing close at his heel, refusing to leave the infant's side. Two medics stepped down. The first was Vanessa Green, mid-30s, tall and lean, her chestnut hair tied back beneath a knit cap. She had steady hands and sharp green eyes that softened when they fell on the babies. Vanessa had built a reputation in Gallatin County as someone who could keep her head in chaos, a skill learned after losing her younger sister in a crash years before. That grief had shaped her. She refused to let another fragile life slip through her fingers if she could help it. She took one of the infants gently, examining quickly. "Umbilical cord cut clean," she murmured, her breath fogging the cold air. This was done by someone trained, someone who knew what they were doing. Her partner, a stocky paramedic with sandy hair and a freckled nose named Eli Turner, checked the second child. Younger than Vanessa, maybe late 20s, Eli had a brisk, no-nonsense air, the kind of man who spoke more with actions than words. He glanced at Caleb with quiet alarm. "They've only just been born. Whoever left them didn't mean for them to survive long." Caleb nodded grimly. "They've had formula. Someone tried, but not enough. 2 or 3 days tops." As Vanessa bundled the infants into warmed blankets, Caleb caught sight of the box they'd been found in. He squatted and turned it over. The faint outline of a stamp remained on the wood, letters blurred with age. Twin Lanterns. He frowned. That was the old name of the ranch, a name he'd only seen in the deed records. Someone had used timber from the property itself, as if tying the children directly to the land. Vanessa barked orders, her voice calm but sharp. "Eli, heat packs now. Caleb, keep pressure on them. Max, stay close. Good dog." She smiled faintly at the shepherd, acknowledging the warmth he offered. Max wagged his tail once, then bent to nuzzle the child nearest him, a protective sentinel. As they worked, Caleb's eyes caught tracks in the mud beyond the pump house. Heavy tire prints carved deep, wider than most farm trucks. They led toward the stream bed, where an old barn leaned crooked against the trees. His pulse quickened. Whoever had left the babies hadn't gone far. But he said nothing for now. His duty was clear. First, save the children. Then, follow the trail. The ambulance doors slammed, siren rising again as the rig pulled away into the night. Caleb stood in the snow, Max at his side, staring after the retreating lights. The pump house door glistened with fresh tar, the crate stamp burned in his mind, and the shadow of headlights on the ridge haunted him. Someone had hidden these infants beneath his new floorboards. Someone had wanted them forgotten. And now, by sheer chance or fate, they had been found. Morning came to Bozeman gray and brittle, the kind of light that never warmed the ground. Snow had stopped in the night, leaving the streets glazed with ice. Caleb walked down Main Street with Max padding at his side, the shepherd's paws leaving neat imprints on the frosted boardwalk. Caleb had barely slept, the cries of the infants still echoing in his mind even after the ambulance had carried them off. Now he needed supplies, nails, lantern oil, and coffee strong enough to cut through the weight pressing on his shoulders. The bell above the door of Turner's General Store rang thin as he entered. The store smelled of kerosene and dried beans, shelves lined with canned goods, bolts of fabric, and tools. A small stove hissed in the corner where old men usually gathered, but today their conversation stopped. Heads turned, eyes lingered. Caleb felt it immediately, the hush that follows a name whispered too many times. Willow Creek. Behind the counter stood Clara Turner, the storekeeper's wife. She was a woman in her early 50s, tall and angular, her auburn hair streaked with gray and pulled back tightly. Clara's thin lips pressed together as though she had swallowed her words. She had once been known as Warm, a Sunday school teacher who baked pies for neighbors, but after losing her eldest son in a mining accident, she had grown brittle, protective of the small family left to her. Still, she managed a nod. "Morning, Officer Hayes." "Dog." Before Caleb could answer, the door creaked again. A tall man stepped inside, stomping snow from his boots. He carried himself with the lazy confidence of someone used to commanding attention. Harlan Voss, owner of the ranch bordering Willow Creek, was in his late 40s. His frame was broad from years of cattle work, though his belly hinted at prosperity. A heavy mustache shaded his upper lip, and his eyes were the watery blue of a man who had seen too many cold mornings. Voss had a reputation for cunning, a neighbor who smiled across the fence but always measured whether the grass might grow better on his side. "Hayes," Voss drawled, sliding the gloves from his thick hands. Heard you picked up Willow Creek yesterday. Caleb inclined his head, keeping his voice even. That's right. Voss reached into his coat and pulled out a folded check, crisp against his work-rough fingers. I'll save you the trouble. $10,000, cashable today. You hand over the deed and we'll call it square. The store went still. Even Clara's hands froze over the ledger she had been balancing. $10,000 was no small offer, not for a cabin that had cost $50,000. Caleb felt Max stiffen at his heel, the shepherd's ears pricking as though he smelled deceit. That's generous, Caleb said slowly, but I'm not selling. The corners of Voss's mustache twitched. Generous is one word, smart is another. That place isn't worth the paint peeling off its walls, but I'll take it. I like a good gamble. Behind Caleb, a shadow shifted. A man he didn't recognize, a thin stranger with a narrow face, pockmarked cheeks, and a cap pulled low-drifted closer than polite. His eyes weren't on the shelves. They were on the keys clipped to Caleb's belt. Max turned with a rumble deep in his chest, lips curling back to show teeth. The man froze, then slipped back toward the door with a muttered curse. Caleb laid a steady hand on Max's neck. Offer declined. Voss stared at him for a long moment, then tucked the check away. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Suit yourself. But everyone knows that land's cursed. Folks who stay too long at Willow Creek don't stay alive. He tipped his hat and walked out, boots crunching hard on the ice. When he was gone, the store's murmurs swelled again. Caleb caught pieces. Samuel Hartwell disappeared after he sealed that someone stammered before going quiet when he noticed Caleb listening. Another whispered. Nobody found his body. Just a locked floor and silence. Later, in the corner of the county library, Eudora Pike shuffled through heavy ledgers bound in cracked leather. She looked smaller in daylight, shoulders stooped under her wool shawl, spectacles perched low. Yet her fingers were sharp as she traced entries in the old land registry. Here, she said to Caleb, who had stopped by to seek answers. Twin Lanterns. That's what the property was called 50 years ago. Not just a ranch. It was a transfer station. During the land rush, deeds passed through there like wildfire, a place where fortunes were made or ruined. She shut the book with a sigh. If someone wanted secrets buried, Willow Creek would have been the place. Outside the library, Caleb found himself intercepted by a lanky youth who smelled faintly of oil and grease. Noah Quinlan, 19, with wiry limbs and a mess of sandy hair that never quite stayed under his cap. His hands were stained with engine grime, the nails permanently black from his work as a mechanic in town. Noah was quick with machines, but quicker with gossip, his restless energy always pushing him into trouble. You're poking around Willow Creek, huh? Noah asked, bouncing on the balls of his feet. Saw something last night. A Silverado pickup rolled past the mining road out by Red Bluff. Mud on its tires, red as blood. Only county trucks get that dirt. Don't ask me how I know. I've patched up enough of them. He grinned nervously. Guess I just did tell you. Caleb's mind worked fast. County trucks at Willow Creek? A coincidence too heavy to ignore. At the hospital, the two infants lay swaddled in incubators, small fists trembling. Nurses whispered about them in the hallway. To preserve anonymity until their origins could be proven, the staff had labeled their charts simply. Lantern A and Lantern BA nod to the stamp burned into the crate that had held them. Caleb stood by the glass, Max sitting beside him, ears tilted as though listening to the fragile heartbeats within. For a fleeting moment, Caleb wondered if fate had drawn him to the ranch not to claim land, but to claim responsibility for lives others had thrown away. The day closed with snow thickening again, soft flakes erasing tracks on the street. But no snow could erase the way people looked at him, whispers curling behind his back like smoke. Willow Creek was not just cursed soil, it was a ledger of sins, and by refusing $10,000, Caleb had chosen to inherit them. Max pressed his head against his hand, as if to remind him he wasn't alone. Snow still blanketed the pastures when Caleb returned to Willow Creek after a morning in town, the quiet of the land broken only by Max's steady gait at his side. The shepherd moved with a stiffness born of age, but his ears were sharp, his nose low to the ground, every fiber of him tuned to the strange unease the property carried. The pump house loomed at the edge of the field, its door still tar-sealed, its silence heavier than the snow that weighed the roof. As Caleb reached the porch, a wagon was already there. Two men stood waiting. The first, broad as an ox, wore the tan coat and silver star of a lawman. Sheriff Vince Mallory, late 40s, had a barrel chest and thick neck, his face ruddy from years of whiskey and prairie wind. His dark hair was retreating from his forehead, and his eyes, small, watery, calculating, shifted too quickly to inspire trust. He had a reputation as a sheriff who preferred convenience to justice, smoothing problems with silence rather than paperwork. His voice was low, like gravel caught in a pan. Beside him was Tobias Lane, the county's most enduring attorney. Near 60, his silver hair was combed back, his suit neat though frayed at the cuffs. Tobias had soft hands that had never touched soil, but his words could till or burn fields depending on how he wielded them. His round spectacles glinted in the winter sun, hiding eyes that were always appraising, measuring angles of profit. Known in town for his eloquence and discretion, Tobias was the man families went to when they wanted their troubles buried deeper than the courthouse ledgers. "Officer Hayes," Mallory said with a half-smile that didn't warm his face, "I hear you've been digging around places best left closed. Tell me, have you opened the hatches under your new floor?" Max, reading the tension before Caleb spoke, stepped forward, hackles lifting, his growl sharp in the crisp air. He planted himself squarely between Caleb and the men, amber eyes narrowed. Mallory shifted his weight, lips twitching, clearly not fond of teeth pointed in his direction. "I found children," Caleb said flatly. "That's what I found." The air tightened. Tobias adjusted his spectacles, his voice smooth as oiled wood. "And with those children, officer, there may come documents. Certain papers that belong to the late Samuel Hartwell, old deeds, transfers, things the county would rather not see confused in public record, papers naming heirs," Mallory cut in, tone sharper now. "You hand them over, we make sure you and your dog live quiet out here. Don't, and, well, quiet is harder to keep." Before Caleb could answer, a figure approached from the road. She walked slowly, leaning on a cane though her back remained straight, her shawl pulled tight against the cold. Agnes Miller, 73, a retired midwife known throughout Gallatin County for her skill in birthing and her stubborn streak. She was short and wiry, her face weathered by decades of midnight calls and lost mothers, her gray hair braided and pinned under a kerchief. Though her body stooped, her eyes carried the fire of a woman who had seen too many lives begin and end under secrecy. Agnes stopped at the foot of the steps, chest rising as she gathered her breath. "I have something to say, and it can't stay hidden," she announced, her voice trembling but clear. Mallory turned, his jaw tightening. "Agnes, go home." But she shook her head, cane tapping the wood. "3 nights ago, I was pulled from my bed. A young woman, Maya Delaney, a waitress at the Highway Diner, was brought to me in labor. They said she needed a place safe, a place no one would look. They took me to Willow Creek, to the very shed your dog unearthed. They locked me in, made me cut the cords, made me swaddle the babes, paid me cash, then snatched my telephone so I couldn't call for help. When it was done, they dragged Maya off, and I haven't seen her since." Caleb felt the weight of her words like a hammer against the chest. Max whined low, as though echoing the sorrow that threaded the old woman's voice. Tobias cleared his throat, voice still soft, though his hands clenched his spectacles until the lenses trembled. "Mrs. Miller, you must be mistaken. The county would never—" But Vanessa Green's voice broke in. She had arrived behind Agnes, her coat still dusted with snow from the hospital steps. She carried a clipboard and the cool authority of someone with evidence in hand. "I examined those infants, Sheriff. Their umbilical cords were cut clean, tied the way a trained hand does it. That hand was yours, wasn't it, Agnes?" Agnes nodded. Vanessa continued, lifting the tiny wristband she had removed from one of the newborns. "And this ink faint on the skin of Lantern A, a marking consistent with the registration code we use on land deeds. Someone pressed the same stamp on a child's flesh that they used to certify property." Tobias's lips pressed thin. Mallory shifted, trying to find a foothold. "You'll be careful what accusations you make, Green. Property law isn't your field." But Caleb had heard enough. He stepped forward, Max pacing at his side, growl rising once more. "Those children weren't meant to be found. Someone thought they'd bury them with papers that could make or break fortunes. And now they want them back." He looked from Mallory to Tobias, his eyes hard. "If you think threatening me will bury this, you're wrong. You're digging your own graves." The sheriff's jaw worked, but he said nothing. Tobias gave the faintest nod as if conceding a round in a longer match. Agnes gripped her cane and whispered almost to herself, Maya trusted them. She wanted nothing but a safe place for her twins, and they took her away. The snow fell harder then, covering the prints at their feet, erasing paths even as new ones were being cut in lies. The night at Willow Creek was heavy and still, the kind of silence that carried the taste of frost on every breath. The snow had frozen into a crust over the pastures, and the moon hung low, dimmed by a veil of drifting clouds. Caleb sat at the kitchen table, lantern extinguished, his revolver holstered within reach. Max lay at his feet, head pressed against his paws but ears twitching with restless vigilance. Both of them felt it before it came, the way the earth seemed to hold its breath. Then the sound arrived, the crunch of tires moving slow on frozen dirt. Caleb rose and peered through a crack in the shutter. 3 pickup trucks rolled without headlights, black silhouettes blending with the night. Engines idled low, the sound like predators circling. They halted short of the yard, and for a moment only the wind moved. Max suddenly stiffened. His head snapped toward the north fence line, nose flaring, body tense. Then he broke the silence with a deep, urgent howl that rolled across the property like a signal flare. Caleb knew the message. Men were already inside the perimeter. He extinguished what little light remained, plunging the cabin into darkness. The shepherd's amber eyes glowed faintly as Caleb crouched beside him. "Quiet now," he whispered. He lifted the old map Eudora Pike had given him from the kitchen shelf, a map inked with trails long forgotten. His finger traced a line marked Silver Fork Mining Road, a narrow route twisting away from Willow Creek through old irrigation ditches. Their only chance. Outside, voices muttered in the dark, the sound of boots scuffing frozen earth. A beam of light flashed briefly, then clicked off. Caleb slipped open the back door. "Come on," he whispered, and Max slinked into the snow beside him. They slid down into the frozen irrigation ditch, the earth walls high enough to mask their silhouettes. Caleb led them along the narrow cut, boots crunching softly. Max moved ahead, his body a shadow, ears pinned forward. Behind them came the crunch of pursuit. A man hissed, "Over here!" and footsteps pounded after them. The ditch bent, forcing them toward the skeletal remains of the old Silver Fork Road. The moon broke free of its cloud, illuminating the snow just enough for Caleb to see the breath of the man chasing them. Suddenly Max launched himself from the ditch, bursting through a cloud of snow like a phantom. The shepherd slammed into the man's hip with brutal force, knocking him flat. A grunt and the crunch of bone followed as the man's weapon flew from his hand. Max stood over him, snarling, his breath a cloud of frost. Caleb didn't stop to watch. "Max, with me," he called, and the shepherd leapt back into stride, leaving the man groaning in the snow. Ahead, 2 lanterns flared to life near the old barn by the stream. Their glow cut through the dark, swaying as though held by invisible hands. For a second, Caleb's heart stopped. But then he caught sight of movement, a boy's lean figure darting between shadows. Liam Ortega, 17, apprentice stable hand from the southern ranches. Short, wiry, with black hair that fell ragged across his forehead. His eyes burned with reckless courage, the kind of fire found in youth who had nothing to lose. Liam's family had drifted after debt took their farm, leaving him to hire himself out wherever he could. Yet he carried a fierce loyalty to the few who treated him with dignity. He waved frantically, then darted back into the dark, leaving the 2 lanterns swinging by the barn doors. To their pursuers, it would look like Caleb had taken cover there. The glow burned like twin eyes, twin lanterns, guiding the way. Shots cracked behind them, bullets whining into timber. Caleb pushed Max forward, ducking low, the ditch curving deeper into the ravine. His radio crackled to life at his belt. He pressed it to his mouth, voice low but urgent. "This is Officer Hayes, Willow Creek property. Hostile vehicles on site, 3 trucks, multiple armed suspects. Transmitting coordinates now." He rattled off the grid markers from Eudora's map, hoping the state trooper's dispatch caught every number. Static answered, then a clipped reply. "Copy coordinates. Units inbound. Hold position if possible. Hold position." Caleb grimaced. Easier said than done. Through the ravine, another voice rose, not from behind, but from a man crouched near the ridge above. His words were jagged, panicked, carried on a radio Caleb couldn't see. "Don't let the ledger slip out." "Repeat, don't let the ledger, lol." His voice broke, static, cutting the rest. "Ledger." The word clanged in Caleb's skull. It wasn't just about the children. There was a record, something tangible that these men feared surfacing. Max pressed close, ears swiveling, body taut. They reached a fallen log bridging the ditch, and Caleb pulled himself over, his breath heavy in the cold. Behind them, the gunfire had ceased. Silence returned, broken only by the wind in the cottonwoods and the low growl rumbling from Max's chest. They were still alive, for now. Dawn cracked across the valley in muted shades of gray, a light that carried no warmth. Willow Creek lay blanketed in frost, its broken fences sparkling like glass under the thin sun. Smoke still curled faintly from the ruts left by the trucks that had fled into the night. Caleb stood on the porch, coat buttoned tight, revolver on his hip, Max at his side. The shepherd's paws shifted in the frost, tail stiff, his body unwilling to relax though the invaders were gone. By sunrise, 2 state troopers had arrived in response to Caleb's desperate call. The first, Sergeant Bill Carver, was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his 40s with dark hair graying at the temples and a calm presence honed over decades of service. His square jaw and measured voice reassured townsfolk who trusted him, but his eyes betrayed a constant weariness, as if he had carried too many unspoken burdens. Beside him was Trooper Henry Dawes, much younger, maybe 25, with a wiry build, freckles dotting his pale face, and the restless energy of a man still eager to prove himself. Henry was green, a stickler for procedure, but his nerves made him quick to fidget with his notebook, scribbling details almost as quickly as they unfolded. "Show us," Carver said simply. Caleb led them back into the cabin, past the floorboards already scarred from his earlier discoveries. He pushed aside furniture, pried up the last sealed section of wood, and revealed the iron lock plate embedded beneath. The smell of tar rose again, sharp in the cold air. Caleb wedged his crowbar into the seam and forced it open. The planks shrieked as nails tore free, and with a final crack, the square panel lifted. Beneath was not gold or silver, but a wooden chest reinforced with iron bands. Caleb lifted it onto the table, its weight surprising for its size. Max sniffed at it, ears tilted, body tense as if the air around the chest itself was wrong. Caleb set the crowbar against the latch, hammered twice, and forced the lock open. The lid gave way with a groan of hinges stiff from neglect. Inside lay a stack of ledgers and paper bundles, carefully arranged, bound with ribbon that had long since frayed. The ink on the covers was still clear, columns of figures, lists of names, and signatures that carried the weight of entire counties. Trooper Dawes leaned close, brow furrowed. "What is this?" Caleb pulled out the first ledger, spreading it across the table. The handwriting was neat, too neat. Columns of payments and commissions, entries marked with initials. Property deeds stamped and counterstamped. Adoption papers, but no names of living children. Only Lantern A and Lantern B placeholders used to shift parcels of land into phantom heirs before selling them on again. It was a fraud, a machine built to cycle property into the hands of men who already owned everything. Carver's jaw clenched. This is more than theft. This is the county ledger rewritten in secret ink. Caleb turned another page and froze. Sheriff Vince Mallory. The name sat beside figures marked commission, sums tallied for services rendered. Below it, Harlan Voss received his cut, land transferred into his ownership for pennies, then flipped again, and scrawled at the bottom in official ink, Rex Thornton, County Commissioner. His signature marked each transaction verified. "Christ," Dawes whispered. His pencil fell from his hand. "This isn't a secret deal. This is half the county." At that moment, the door creaked. Agnes Miller shuffled inside, shawl pulled around her shoulders, eyes tired but determined. "I know that hand," she murmured, pointing at the looping script across the margins. "That's Elliot Crane, the clerk from the courthouse. He used to write every deed that passed through his desk, said his pen would outlive him. He was right." Agnes looked smaller than she had the day before, the weight of confession heavy on her frail shoulders, but her voice did not waver. "He's the one who drafted the adoption papers. He forged the names that never existed. I'd swear to it before a Judge Vanessa Green arrived moments later, coat zipped against the cold, clipboard tucked under her arm. She had left the hospital only briefly, but the ink mark she had taken from Lantern A's wrist had gnawed at her thoughts all night. She laid a sheet of paper on the table, the copied imprint carefully enlarged. I checked county archives. This sequence, RB 4791, it matches deeds filed in Red Bluff Township, the same code printed on hundreds of properties sold and resold these last 10 years. Someone used the same stamp for land deeds and pressed it on a newborn child. Her eyes were sharp, her voice colder than the frost outside. They meant to make those infants proof of inheritance. Flesh and blood to cover paper and ink. Caleb felt Max nudge his knee, as if the dog sensed his anger mounting. He placed a steadying hand on Max's head, grounding himself. As if on cue, Max padded toward the pantry, his nose pressed against the wall near a stack of old salt blocks left to crumble. He barked once, sharp and deliberate. Caleb and Carver exchanged a glance. Together they shifted the blocks aside, revealing a narrow recess where a second lock was embedded. An old keyhole, rusted, hidden behind decades of dust. Caleb pried at it until something clinked against the floorboards. A brass key, long forgotten, wedged between the wall and the shelf. He held it up, its teeth glinting faintly. "Not the pantry," he murmured. "This is for the pump house." Carver nodded grimly. "Then it's time we see what else they've been hiding." The ledger lay open on the table, pages fluttering in the draft, the names and numbers bleeding into the room like poison. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the windows as though the land itself wanted the truth buried again. But the truth was free now, and it carried names powerful enough to burn a county to the ground. The sun had barely climbed above the frosted ridges when Caleb returned to the pump house, brass key in hand, ledger tucked beneath his arm. Max trotted close, his breath puffing like steam, his body taut with anticipation. The air smelled of tar and rust. The pump house door bore the scars of years sealed shut. But before Caleb could try the key, the crunch of tires and the low thrum of engines announced the next move in this deadly game. 3 trucks rolled to a stop at the edge of the pasture. Men stepped out, their faces half covered with scarves, rifles slung loosely but ready. Their boots snapped against the frozen ground as they spread, encircling the pump house. Caleb recognized the way they moved. Mercenaries, not farmers. The last to arrive was Sheriff Vince Mallory. He climbed from the cab of his own truck, coat buttoned tight, badge glinting like a mockery of authority. His ruddy face shone with a smugness that carried across the field. "Morning, Hayes," he called, voice coarse. "Time to hand over what doesn't belong to you." Caleb stepped out slowly, Max at his side, the dog's amber eyes locked on Mallory with a predator's stare. Caleb raised the ledger high, the brittle pages fluttering in the breeze. His voice carried, sharp and clear. "I know what's in here. And so do you. But here's something you didn't want them," he pointed toward the gunman, "to hear. Every last one of you is named in the fund, payments marked, commissions signed, and at the end of every job, a note, closed. That means you weren't walking away. You were going to be erased, like Samuel Hartwell." The mercenaries shifted. One lowered his rifle, another swore under his breath. Their eyes darted to Mallory. They had seen betrayal before. Caleb pressed on. "You've been played. You're as disposable as the babies they buried under my floor." Max chose his moment. With a guttural snarl, the shepherd launched himself forward. His body slammed into Mallory's chest, pinning him against the pump house wall. The sheriff's breath burst from him in a grunt, his pistol clattering into the snow. Caleb closed the distance, yanking Mallory's arm behind his back and snapping cold iron cuffs onto his wrists. Mallory cursed, his voice muffled against the wooden planks, but he was caught. From the corner of the pasture, another figure approached. Erin Brooks, investigator with the State Attorney General's office, wore a dark wool coat buttoned against the cold, her badge clipped neatly at the lapel. She was in her early 40s, with sharp cheekbones, close-cropped black hair streaked with gray, and a gaze that cut like glass. Erin had built her career digging through corruption in small counties where men thought nobody watched. The moment she received Caleb's call, she drove through the night. She took the ledger from Caleb, flipping pages with practiced precision. Her lips moved silently as she read, and then she looked up, her expression taut. "This is enough to sign warrants." "Rex Thornton's finished. I'll have him in cuffs before sundown." Mallory spat into the snow, but his shoulders sagged. He knew Erin Brooks's name. When she appeared, careers ended. At the library, Eudora Pike was already working her own thread of the web. She pulled yellowing blueprints from the archives, her gnarled hands trembling only slightly as she unrolled the brittle paper. The ink lines revealed a surprise: an old well shaft running beneath Willow Creek, a narrow tunnel leading to the barn by the creek. "They use this," she told Aaron later, "to move papers out unseen. A pipeline for fraud right under our noses." But the most pressing matter was not in paper. It was flesh and blood. Caleb pressed Mallory against the wall. "Where is she? Where's Maya Delaney?" Mallory only sneered, his eyes swollen with hate. But Harlan Voss, who had crept up quietly from the rear truck, lost his nerve. His broad frame hunched, his hands trembling as if the winter cold had finally broken through. "Don't kill me," he blurted. "I'll talk." His mustache quivered, and the man who had offered Caleb $10,000 only days before looked suddenly small. "She's at a roadside motel. Room 14, keys with one of the boys. They told me to keep her quiet until the papers were filed. I swear I never touched her." Caleb didn't waste time. Aaron secured Mallory. Carver's troopers rounded up the mercenaries, half willing now to drop weapons rather than die for a sheriff who'd already sold them out. Caleb and Max climbed into a cruiser, the dog pressing his nose to the window as the road blurred past. The motel was a squat row of doors along the highway, neon flickering vacancy in sputtering blue. Oil drums smoked in the parking lot, and the smell of cheap whiskey clung to the air. Caleb approached quietly, hand on his revolver. Max moved ahead, nose sweeping the ground. At the corner, the shepherd stopped dead before one door, hackles lifting, then began to bark, sharp, insistent, the sound of certainty. Room 14. Caleb kicked the door. The wood splintered inward. The room reeked of stale beer and fear. On the bed lay Maya Delaney. She was in her late 20s, slender but gaunt from days without proper care. Her dark hair clung damp to her face, eyes sunken but still burning with defiance. She wore a waitress's uniform, wrinkled and stained, her apron discarded on the floor. Her wrists bore marks from rope and her lips were cracked from thirst. When she saw Caleb, she tried to rise but collapsed. He caught her, steadying her thin frame. Max pressed against her leg, whining softly, tail wagging with recognition. "They took my babies," she whispered hoarsely, her throat raw. "I begged them not to. I only wanted them safe." Caleb looked into her eyes and gave a steady nod. "They're safe now, alive, and you will see them again." For the first time since Willow Creek entered his life, Caleb felt the weight shift. The land's curse had not been broken yet, but its chains had cracked. By the time spring arrived in Bozeman, the frost that had haunted the valley for months gave way to green pastures and fields wet with meltwater. The town courthouse, once just a backdrop for whispers, now stood as the stage for reckoning. The air inside the chamber was tense, the wooden benches filled with townsfolk who had come not out of duty but out of hunger to see the truth laid bare after decades of silence. On the stand sat Rex Thornton, county commissioner. At 55, he still wore the tailored suits of power, his thinning blonde hair slicked back with oil, his round face sweating under the judge's glare. His soft hands, accustomed to signing papers rather than laboring, clutched at the arms of his chair. Once smug, now he looked like a man who knew the walls had closed in. The charges read against him, fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder, echoed in the vaulted room. Beside him, Sheriff Vince Mallory slouched, his ruddy face pale now, the swagger drained from his broad frame. His badge had been stripped, his reputation hollowed. He glanced at the floorboards as if the wood might open and swallow him whole. Elliot Crane, the courthouse clerk, appeared almost fragile by comparison. Barely past 40, with thinning brown hair and spectacles that slid constantly down his nose, Elliot looked like a man who had lived his entire life behind paper. Yet his neat handwriting had been the backbone of the fraud. His expression was one of shame, perhaps for being caught, perhaps for having believed he was untouchable. The jury's verdict was swift. Thornton, Mallory, and Crane were sentenced to long years behind bars, their names forever tied to betrayal. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room, but among them was a sense of release. The shadow over Gallatin County had finally lifted. Harlan Voss sat apart, shoulders hunched, his mustache damp with sweat. His cooperation had earned him leniency-reduced charges in exchange for land deeds returned and testimony provided. To many, he remained a traitor to the people, but his penance would be measured in acres given back to families he had helped steal from. In the weeks that followed, the healing began. At the county hospital, Maya Delaney walked unsteadily down the sterile corridor toward a room glowing with soft light. She was still gaunt, her dark hair pulled back loosely, but her eyes, tired and rimmed red, shone with hope. When the nurse placed the twins in her arms, tears slipped silently down her cheeks. "Lantern A, Lantern B," the nurse whispered softly. "They have names now. Names you can give them." Maya pressed her lips to their foreheads, whispering promises no one else could hear. Caleb stood nearby, Max sitting close at his leg. The shepherd's ears twitched, head tilted at the sound of the infant's cries. His tail swept the linoleum floor slowly, almost reverently. Caleb bent to stroke his head. "You kept them alive, partner. Don't think I've forgotten the future of Willow Creek shifted too." Caleb could have claimed the land as his own, selling it to erase the memories. Instead, he stood before a small crowd on the first warm day of spring, the valley alive with birdsong, and announced his decision. The cabin and its acres would become Twin Lantern's sanctuary, a refuge for abandoned children and animals alike. The name honored the stamp burned into the crate that had once held death but now symbolized hope. Max became the sanctuary's first resident. His black and tan coat, streaked with gray, gleamed under the sun as he trotted among children who ran laughing through the fields. His left ear still drooped, his scar still faint along his flank, but his spirit was strong. During the dedication, while Caleb spoke of justice and renewal, Max slipped quietly behind the food table and stole 2 sausages from an unwatched plate. The children squealed with laughter, chasing him across the yard until he dropped into the grass, tail wagging in pure joy. Vanessa Green, never one to rest idle, took her experience from the case and built something lasting. She founded a mobile clinic that traveled along the highways, bringing medical care to single mothers who had nowhere else to turn. Her van, painted white with a red lantern symbol on its side, became a beacon to women who might otherwise have suffered alone. Eudora Pike, the old librarian, kept her promise as well. She wrote a slim book titled The 2 Lanterns of Willow Creek, part history, part testimony, capturing in careful words the strange convergence of greed, betrayal, and redemption that had marked the valley. A copy sat proudly in the town library, its leather cover bearing the emboss of 2 small lanterns glowing side by side. "One," she wrote in the introduction, "for truth, and one for compassion. May neither be extinguished." Caleb hung 2 lanterns outside the cabin's porch. Every evening, as dusk fell and the valley filled with shadows, their light glowed against the wood, a reminder of what had been lost and found. To strangers, they were just lamps. To those who knew, they were eternal witnesses, one for the lives saved, one for the man and dog who refused to let the dark win. That spring, the town spoke of Willow Creek not as a curse, but as a story told to children, a legend that carried the weight of myth. They said justice had come late but strong, carried on the back of a shepherd, and the resolve of a man who chose to protect rather than turn away. And in the laughter of children, in the warmth of the sanctuary, in the steady glow of 2 lanterns, the West found a story not of greed, but of mercy. Sometimes the greatest miracles do not come as flashes of lightning or voices from the heavens. Sometimes they come as the cry of 2 children saved from the dark, or the loyalty of a dog who refuses to give up. This story reminds us that when the world feels corrupted by greed and silence, God still places light in our path, truth and compassion, like 2 lanterns shining against the night. In our daily lives, we may not fight sheriffs or uncover hidden ledgers, but we all face moments when we must choose, to walk past in silence or to stand firm for what is right. The Lord calls us to be lanterns for others, to bring warmth where there is cold, hope where there is despair. If this story touched your heart, I ask you to share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances. Leave a comment below and tell us where you are watching from. And if you believe in miracles, if you believe that God's love can turn darkness into light, type Amen in the comments. Subscribe to this channel for more stories that remind us of faith, redemption, and the power of compassion. May God bless you, and may His light guide your path always.